Hello and welcome to this Beyond Imagination panel on crafting iconic brand stories. So we're going to be digging into the creativity and craft that goes into making those films and ads that we all remember. And hopefully we'll unearth some gems for any marketers or agency folk or even aspiring filmmakers to help you know how to really get the best out of visual effects. And we've got a couple of real experts here for what I think is going to be a really fun chat. We've got Karsten Keller, Creative Director at the Mill London, and Gavin Welsman, ECD at the Mill New York. Hi, guys.
Hello, guys. It's nice to be here.
Yep, thank you.
So to kick things off, we've got this rather grand title, Iconic Brand Stories, and we're going to be, I'm sure, touching on pieces of work that you both admire. But what's your criteria for deciding whether something counts as an iconic brand story, do you think? I'm going to kick off with you, Gavin.
I think we all see those scripts that come and land on your desk and they're just, the hairs on the back of your neck go up and you just like, this is, you, as you're reading more and more, you start to smile and you just, you know, this is potential for a very special script. And then you start hearing who's involved with it, who potentially director-wise could be involved, and you get excited that one or two, hopefully more, land on your desk, you know, every 6 months, and you can tell straight away that they're very special. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it is at that point, but you just know, because it's almost like as you're reading, you're smiling and getting excited as you're reading and coming up with ideas on the fly, even within that first initial read.
And what do you reckon, Karsten? Is there ever a tell? Or do you get scripts that don't look much on paper that actually turn out to be iconic? Or does it need that core thing?
No, I actually agree with Gavin. I think in most of my career, when the moment you get that script, you actually realize that straight away, because it doesn't happen very often. Like sometimes every 2 years even, you know, like Gav said, 6 months is already quite lucky, but you normally see that in the storyboards already in the script. It's just this first initial idea, and sometimes that can even be just a log line, or let's say, I don't know, 4 lines of text, and you're like, wow, that's absolutely insane. I would love to be involved in that one, you know, like, and that doesn't happen very often because it has to have a refreshing idea, you know.
Yes, some of the most amazing scripts actually have even started off even simpler than that, by a whisper on a roof deck over a beer. Somebody said to me, have you heard about this new XYZ? And you start digging a little bit deeper. There's almost like the whispers of this idea and this special project coming up. Sometimes it's just over a beer, you know, over a conversation, and then you start digging and actually see the script. So some of the jobs I've been lucky enough to work on started off with just a little bit of water cooler chat or chat on a roof deck somewhere over a beer.
I love the idea that before they're even been formalized into a script, they're just putting out this energy into the industry that you're just picking up on it.
Yeah.
And you know, before we really dig into the sort of making and the craft and all that, I think it'd be really great for viewers, you know, just to know a little bit about you both and your own, you know, your own pathways and your own sort of experience in the sector. So, I mean, to both of you, how did you first get involved in VFX, and what drew you to it?
Well, I was at art college, and I think back then, I don't want to date myself too much, but I've been in it for a while. But actually, when I studied art and design, specializing in computer graphics, and actually visual effects or post-production, what I knew about it actually didn't exist. Photoshop, I knew a little bit of everything. Photoshop, and I was sort of a jack of all trades, master of none. And I feel like a lot of people feel like that when they leave university or college. And really what sparked my interest was somebody came in and gave a presentation about a car commercial. And the minute I saw what they had done on this moving footage, and I think it was back then, it was pretty simple. They were painting out reflections, cleaning up the car, changing the color, enhancing the spot. The minute I saw that presentation, it really did spark my interest. And I really do encourage as many people as possible in the industry to go off and give talks to the next generation of students, because that's what sort of led me to go, that's what I wanted to do. And I came out of a generation where everyone was going into website design, and that's where the sort of most of the students were going, were computer graphics, 3D animation, and then a lot of web designers as well. And I knew that's not what I wanted to do. So I started as a runner at the mill, and I'm very proud to say that, because I thought I wanted to get into CG. And then I realized compositing was my trade I wanted to do. And it ties back in with Photoshop. Really, Photoshop is, and what Flame was back then was the moving version of Photoshop. And I sort of worked my way up and became a lead, and started running jobs, running small music videos, and then moved to New York. And so the rest is history, really, and became the head of 2D, and now director. So the years go by very quickly when you're having fun and enjoying what you're doing, and before you know it, many years have gone by. And I feel that's a good sign of a job that actually is more like a hobby.
And so some of the viewers might be more well versed in the technicalities of VFX. So for those who are just coming to it, what's a compositor? If you can tell us as succinctly as you can.
Whenever I first saw Flame or a compositing piece of software, I said it's moving Photoshop. And someone actually disagreed with me and said, no, it's much more than that. I said, even to today, if you know how to manipulate images on a computer, either still form or moving, the principle's the same. Composition is basically taking photographic elements or CG elements and combining one image where the viewer is unaware that you've actually manipulated that image in any shape or form. That's what we pride ourselves on. So compositing is taking multiple images and making it look like one seamless piece of film.
And Karsten, what was your route through VFX?
That dates back all the way. I'm just trying to gather it all together. I think I started out with around 12 years doing like graphics for my father, like designs, like architectural plans, and I really enjoyed that kind of process. Also a little bit more 2D, obviously, back in the day, and then that was the time, we're talking mid-90s here. And then that time, obviously, big movies came about, like Toy Story, Jurassic Park, all of that, and obviously then 3D was a massive thing, and I was like, that is what I really, really enjoy, like computer graphics, CG, 3D, going from 2D into 3D, and then I started out with 19 in a television company, also as an intern. So that internship went on for a couple of months, and there was all sorts of kind of procedures to kind of get into a junior position. But there was a fantastic upbringing that in that company. There was a really good culture of kind of bringing people through the ranks. So I stayed there for 5 years, and then actually. Funny that I actually met someone, an ex-mill person in Munich back in the day, after 5 years being already a CG artist, and that person actually then got me into London. You know, he said, hey, you had to get into the London market, which is obviously much, much bigger. So then I started out at MPC back in 2006, with 24, and then started still as a CG artist, supervisor, and then worked my way up to the head of the department in CG, and then creative director.
And I mean, you both do kind of similar-ish, have similar-ish roles now, but you've come up through slightly different pathways. So does that affect how you view, or what you're looking for in a well-crafted ad?
I think our backgrounds are very similar, right, Karsten? I think that it's been quite refreshing. We actually just recently only met each other, but we know a lot of the same people. The industry in visual effects is actually quite small, and it was actually quite nice to actually chat and actually realize and connect the dots. And a lot of the pieces of work that Karsten's done is stuff that I either bid on or was very aware of, and or was jealous that I didn't work on. So I think there's always, between the MPC and the Mill brand back in the day, there was always healthy competition, and any jobs that we didn't do that they did, we were always sort of like, jealous is the wrong word, just, we just felt like we missed out and we saw the project, and that healthy competition, and I'm sure it was the same for those guys as well. And I think what we do day to day now is probably very, very similar. You be specialize in one type of trade. Karsten came through the CG background, 3D, and I came through the 2D compositing. And what we do now is really focusing on business and winning the best work, and giving our expertise and lending our eye to the more junior artists to really guide them and give them creative support.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think having also, there's so many people we work with on a daily basis at the mill, and everyone has completely different backgrounds and pathways. And I think that makes it even more interesting, like you're not coming all from the same university. Otherwise, you would just create an echo chamber and everyone would just be talking exactly the same language. And I think it's good to have different angles, you know, like different cultures, like there's people from Argentina, Sweden, Germany, Italy. I mean, the list goes on. And I think everyone has, yeah, different university background, or sometimes not even university at all, you know, like I think that makes it so unique and so special. And I think especially around New York and London, you can really feel exactly that kind of massive melting pot of cultures coming together. And I think that makes it so unique to work there, you know?
Yeah, I think that's what I really enjoy. When I first joined the industry, is the melting pot of culture, the exposure. I grew up in South London, and you know, which isn't that far removed, to central London. But I just found that when I started working in industry, just the exposure to different cultures, music, food, travel, and people from all over the world I got to meet was really exciting. And one thing we were really proud of, the 2D department here, for example, that I was part of, we had such a good mixture of people from across the many countries, a really good build-up of female artists versus male artists, a really good age range from like a 17-year-old to a 65-year-old working in a department. You know, it was a really good blend, and it felt like a family, and it was very exciting to see how everyone could grow and really take advantage of opportunities at all these different levels.
It's also interesting. I mean, given the topic of the discussion, which is, you know, how to build iconic brand stories. I mean, you know, obviously the starting point on any particular project is the idea, but actually there's a level beneath that, which is the people. It is that competition that pushes you to get better. It is that mix of people which brings different ideas, you know, even before you get to any individual project.
Yeah, it is really, and that's what any good director does. That if you look at all the successful directors, what they're really good at is picking the best people to be part of that team. They bring a unique group of people together, from editors to cinematographers, all the way from the agency creatives, and everybody's on their A game. When you get that special moment when everyone comes together and stays involved from the beginning to the end, that's when you create something very special. It's really that collaborative involvement. You know, I think both me and Carsten will agree that's probably some of the best projects we've done is when the editor and the DP, cinematographer, stays involved all the way to the end. You know, you want their involvement. You don't want to water down that idea. And sometimes when we see a special script and it falls slightly short, it's because certain people have started to drop off and move on to other projects. If you can keep that core team together on the visual effects side and all the other areas of what makes a great commercial, that generally gives you a much better product.
And so, you know, since you started out, I mean, how has the role of VFX changed in that time? I mean, you know, Gavin, you mentioned at the beginning, it might have been a bit of cleanup, it might have been changing color here and there, but, you know, I mean, we see entire live action movies that are essentially CG animation now. So, you know, what's the shift been like in, you know, in the commercial space? What's your point of view, Karsten?
I was just about to say, I think I'm around now since probably 22 years now. Yeah, since I'm 18, and I've seen tremendous change, like exactly what Gav said, like starting out in the early 2000s, like for instance, everything was much more 2D centric simply because we had to find these solutions in 2D because CG was so expensive. And now with these kind of drops in price and obviously much more availability for talent to learn that much quicker, everything has shifted dramatically, you know, like more people flooding in the industry, better talents. Obviously now when you look to students coming through the ranks, like the quality of their final movies when they come out of university is absolutely mind-boggling. It's like you can easily make the bake-off for the Oscars almost, you know, like, or VES awards. And I think that has changed dramatically, like the education, the talent pool, but also I think the price drop simply made it much more appealing for clients to say, shall we go crazy here and shall we go into CG? But then I think that's the whole point of this discussion today. I think, does it really help to make that a special ad? Not necessarily. Like, I think the idea is always the most important thing, and everything else, like the CG aspect, VFX aspect, needs to be the supporting role. And I think you can throw literally the kitchen sink at it in CG and say everything has to be CG, but that doesn't guarantee you full success. The idea still has to come first.
Are there any, are there any ads that you think of when you classic ads where you think today that would have been entirely CG?
Yeah, I guess the first one that just jumps to mind is Sony balls, and that's quite a 17-year-old commercial. It's
I cannot be 17 years old. I refuse to believe it.
So I think it's definitely one of those first spots that I saw where it just hit the right note on every level. An amazing track from Jose Gonzalez. The visuals, I don't think they would have made it quite the same way today. They literally threw, hundreds of thousands of these rubber balls, broke car windows. But they were very smart, about the way they combined it. We did still combine plates, I believe, back in the day. Nikolai Fusvik, amazing director, still making great commercials today. Back then, I feel like some of the shots that you saw probably would have been pushed into CG. But just because you can use CG or visual effects for a spot, you should still, I think that the really amazing directors that have stood the test of time that understand visual effects, they're still very light-handed when it comes to putting visual effects onto a spot. Obviously, we could put and replace every one of those shots with visual effects with CG, but you really want to keep the viewer guessing and you want to use it in a light-handed way. One of the spots we were discussing the other day that were very smart was the ostrich Samsung spot. There were Mateus, who was the director on that, was very careful about which shots should be CG, which shots should be real animals, and he really kept and you just watch the spot, and it's so enjoyable to watch. You don't even think about it until obviously the ostrich starts flying, and then it's obviously CG. But then even some people probably didn't even think about it at that point. But that's a good example. And obviously that spot was made, what, 5 years ago, Carsten?
Yeah, I think 2016, yeah. But then again, to Gavin's point, I think when you see the storyboards and maybe even already the first offline, you hear the music, like then okay, this is something special. There's not even any CG in it. It's just a couple of rough shots and nothing special to it, but you hear it and you see the flow in the ad and you're like, wow, it's going to be epic, And I think
another amazing music track, having Elton John, I think that when they found out they could use that track, that must have been the icing on the cake.
Absolutely. But then again, every department kind of works hard with each other, like direction, music, editing, VFX, like when everyone is aligned, exactly what we just discussed, like that's when the magic really happens,
And I mean, do you ever think of ads, ads that have been made recently and think, oh my God, how would we have done that 10, 15 years ago? I think the other day Gavin, we were speaking about quite a fun example of that.
Well, I would say the Burberry ice spot, or it's called Festive, I believe. If you were forced to make that 17 years ago, how would you have gone about filming that?
Absolutely, I agree. I think 15, 16 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible unless you throw massive budgets onto it in terms of and huge amounts of people, because it just simply comes down to availability of artists. Like, do you have enough people who actually know what they're doing when it comes to complex topics like that kind of falling ice? It's a lot of effects that goes into it, the simulation, the breakup, like all the technicalities. And I think 15, 16 years ago, it comes down to, do you have enough artists, but also the software, the calculation power, the algorithms basically to come up with all those kind of nice breakups. And I think that changed over the last 5, 6 years absolutely dramatically, going into specific softwares, let's say like Houdini, that actually allows everyone to actually do ads like that. I think 15, 16 years ago, we would have also probably looked at 3 or 4 times the time to actually do the ad if we would have decided to do it in CG. So the price tag would have been, we would have basically ruled ourselves out anyway to do it in CG because you just don't have that budget.
I think you just had less control. They probably would have tried to shoot some ice on blue screen or black screen. They would have tried to do it as 2D elements. There might have been a lot more close-up smashing of ice. They would have just found a clever way to edit around it. They wouldn't have had as much control. What's great about that spot is that they would have previewed out the whole thing. They would have had the choreographed dance moves all planned out, and they really could throw the kitchen sink at it because they knew they had the flexibility to put all of the ice in. I think what was really fun about a project like that is that you become, as like a director does, they become obsessed with that subject, right? So we just finished the Bud Light Lemon spot, which has a lot of similarities to you know, the Sony balls that we mentioned, and also to the ice spot as well. And as a visual effects artist, you become obsessed with ice. You be obsessed with how lemon bounces off a car window. You know, does it bounce? Does it break apart? And that's one of the fun things about our job, is that you have to do this research, and you really get obsessed with how the visual effects should look and act. It becomes an obsession.
I mean, it's interesting because, you know, obviously, again, you know, the idea is the heart of everything, the big idea, but it's these tiny little details that actually create the magic, I guess. You know, one of the spots, and I hope I'm not embarrassing anyone here, one of the spots I've always just loved because of that detail is I think it's SSE Maya, which is an orangutan, and she's walking through London, and it's, I mean, if I didn't have the common sense to know an orangutan isn't walking through London, I would believe it's real. That detail is incredible.
Yeah, well, if you look at that again, and another amazing, I believe Frederic Planchon directed that, a great director of performance. You know, if you look at his Cadbury's commercial that he I think with the little girl going into it was a Christmas ad, and he was going into a corner shop. Very British, very great storytelling, really pulls on the heartstrings. He took what he learned from what he's best at and put that into a heavy visual effects commercial. And he understands visual effects. He understands how to get that. And I'm sure he was very involved when they were actually building that performance out of the orangutan. So he took that skill set and applied it to a visual effects commercial. And I believe that warmth and humanity, that sort of, again, the same things that pull on the heartstrings, he did the same with a fully CG animal.
And I think maybe adding to the SSE, because actually we watched it obviously from the other side, and it was really like when we saw that, we're like, wow, that kind of completely opens, like that pushes the bar so much higher than what actually was there before, you know. And when you look how it was integrated like that, when comes, like, I don't know, you have like really good cinematography skills from, let's say, from the director, like this kind of integration of it's not just you're shooting an empty plate and plonk the CG on top. You always have something in the foreground out of focus. It really is integrated absolutely seamlessly. And I think, again, to Gaz's point, when all the departments work together, like VFX, the DOP, the director, like if you have a proper strong vision of how that character, let's say Maya, sits in that shot, foreground element, something like a lamp, a shade, or like just an object out of focus, you don't even know what it is, it sits in, and to have that knowledge, that's when the good people come together, and again, it makes it so special and so realistic.
Exactly. Like, you have to always film a spot that's visual effects heavy as if it's happening for real. You've got to throw all of those. Like, if you were to see something like that in camera happening, you've got to film it in the most natural way. And sometimes it makes it more hot. It makes it more work for the visual effects artist, for the post-production company. But I always say the misconception that some people, that directors or filmmakers have, is that when they have a visual effects, they believe locked off camera, nothing on the lens, no lens flares. And I'm in the mind of like, throw everything at it. You give us places to hide our visual effects. The last thing we want is a clean stage with a big shiny object saying visual effects here. You want to hide it between, even if they put Vaseline or dirt on the lens, even if they put a massive light flare, even if the camera's shaking, there's vibrations all over it. It doesn't matter. If that helps to tell the story and make it more believable, it gives us places to hide our visual effects. And all that layer of grit and layers, you know, it really does help make a very cohesive piece of film. Again, going back to what I was saying before, you know, you really want to hide and layer that up. And as long as it looks, you've done it with, you've had time to craft that and put those layers on top, that normally gives you the best results.
Like the CG guys, they're always more want to show off their 3D objects because they spend 2-3 months making, let's say, the fur, all the detail, the little frizzy fur and all of that. And you want to obviously render it, or let's say calculate it in a way that everyone can see that, but that doesn't make it realistic at all. And that's when you have to have a completely different input and understanding what actually is real. No, it doesn't need to be super sharp, it has to be out of focus. And then there was always, like, I remember years and years back whereby you have these kind of strong opinions of what is real and what has to be shown. And I think to have different inputs, different backgrounds, you come to a really good consensus, you know, like, and that's when the best, that's when you get the best results, you know.
I'm just imagining these CG artists going, I just want you to see how many hair follicles there are.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's why sometimes it's good to give, you know, talking about visual effects, some of the best spots is where you give the colorist the ability to grade it at the end, because you've put everything in. Sometimes with the big visual effects spots, we grade at the end. And when you first see it and you see how much detail has been lost in your visual effects, you might be a bit sort of a little bit heartbroken, because a lot of the hard work you've seen has actually been now hidden behind, like the crushing of the blacks, for example, or the blowing out of the highlights. But what you're doing is actually making it more believable, because realistically, when you film something in camera, you won't get the perfect exposure. You won't get all of that information. And generally, when we put CG into a shot, it's too perfect. And that's the job of the compositor, is to really hide that and blend it in a believable way based on reality. And the other thing I would say is, one thing we always say is reference is king. You know, when you're in front of a lens and you're building a orangutan or smashing lemons or smashing ice, you want to get that material in front of the lens on the day. You want to hold it up against the sky. You want to break it. You want someone to hold it. You really want to understand everything with that proper film camera and get that reference. And again, all of the fun stuff I talked about before with squeezing lemons, smashing lemons. I'm sure the guys over NPC had a lot of fun smashing ice for real, and actually seeing how it breaks apart if it's like a 2-foot piece of ice or a small, like snowball size. You know, that's the fun of the job, is really understanding that. And you know, the devil's in the details, and you really spend a lot of time making that look as believable as possible.
But having said that, so I mean, so many ads do require that real believability, but there are also some ads where there's some great examples of you know, when you've really been able to get playful with the CG. Like, for example, I think one example might be something like Snickers, famous Super Bowl ad with Danny Trejo.
Peter hit me on the nose with a football. I can't go to the dance like this.
Well, I'm sure it was an accident, sweetheart.
An eye for an eye.
Well, that's the thing. But believe it or not, even with that spot, and it's a great spot. I think it won every award under the sun and more. I think a lot of people didn't realize, even if they were big Brady Bunch fans, for example, they watched the whole thing and suddenly go, hang on a minute, something's not right here. But they enjoyed it for what it was. It was a very, very well-crafted script.
Marcia, Marcia, Marcia.
Jan, this isn't about you.
It never is.
Such a funny idea. Great director, Jim Jenkins, who understands the visual effects. He obviously is a comedy genius and gets that level right every single time. And, you know, I think I watched the behind the scenes the other day for that spot, and it's a good example just because the visual effects in that actually wasn't that groundbreaking. What was really careful is how they studied the original footage. They really analyzed what went into the original lighting setup, the camera setup. So they basically mimicked that. And actually, if you film stuff correctly and you do enough prep, when it actually comes to put this stuff together, it actually is not that complicated. The stuff that really takes time to shoehorn together is stuff that actually sometimes hasn't been shot correctly. So that spot, I just love that spot, just because it's just, the idea carries you through and you don't even question what you're watching. You just enjoy the spot. And at the end you go, hang on a minute, that was, and then you analyze it after you watched it. And I think that's a good sign. And I think that spot will be around for many years. And I think it won a Super Clio, or I can't remember exactly what it was now, but it got like a very prestigious couple of awards that you only get like once every 2 or 3 years, I think.
And so if, say, you know, aspiring director or a client wants to get the best out of their VFX team, what are the common, you know, misconceptions that you see, like, for example, around timing, you know, the pace that different things take, impatience maybe, or maybe even being overwhelmed with decisions? What do you see on that front?
I think when the director wants to push the VFX quite a lot, like, I think obviously we always try to assemble the best team based on the task. Like it's not like there's specialists, like we said, like for instance for fur, for grooming, then there will be 2D specialists for exactly what Gav just mentioned, the integration of, or the combining of 2 different footages, again with that understanding of okay, what is the focal length here, what is the the height of the camera? How do we line that all up? How do I need to go to the CG guys to learn from that, almost reverse engineer the footage? Like, so whatever the task is, you want to obviously then assemble the team for that task. So that's kind of a big challenge, because obviously there's always different projects going on, and to have that kind of perfect team for that job is always a little bit of a balancing act. To like, obviously the stars need to be all aligned almost, you know. Like that's when producers become extremely important in that equation as well, and our scheduling teams to work that all out, to basically to provide the best team possible at that given time to the director. And then obviously work also on relationships, like certain people click with certain other people, you know, like that is really, really important. Like after a while you have that relationship, and then that continues over the years. I'm pretty sure, Gavin, you have the same experience.
Yeah, going back to your question, I think that using the right tool for the right job, you know, it really depends on the schedule, the idea. You don't always need the biggest hammer to break the small, you know, the smallest nut. You know, you really, where our expertise comes in is you really want to, based on relationships, you want to guide people. And that's where we find that agencies or filmmakers, they come to us as early as possible to really float ideas and brainstorm. And we always take money and schedule in consideration to a degree, because sometimes if you know too much about that, it limits your creativity. And I like to go in with a vague idea of timing and money, but I also like to say, well, let's just put that aside for a moment. Let's come up with the best ideas. And then there's a sort of reality check from your producer or somebody else and say, well, actually, they've only got, you know, 3 weeks to get this done, or 4 weeks. But then say, okay, so if you want to get that result, these are the options. So it's really a creative partnership. The way we see it is like, we can offer you options. We never will ever say this is the only way to film it. It's the only way to capture these visuals. We really work, well, we hope we work smartly with offering some really smart solutions for budgets, for timing, but also at the end of the day, there's no point having some massive camera rig if you're just going to create a 1 second, 2 second shot that's really going to be a lot simpler. You just got to be smart about the decisions you make, and the only thing that matters is what ends up on the screen. So there's no point spending hours or weeks filming something and then obviously crafting. You really got to think about the end result and be smart about how you actually achieve that, because it can be a lot of wasted time. Maybe the shot gets cut, or it's very much about broad brushstrokes. And I think that comes from experience.
Actually, just adding, Gav, to that point, sometimes it's actually good what you just mentioned about the time budget and the money budget. I think sometimes it's also good to have a bit of a time pressure, because if you know, here's my idea, I have 4 weeks after the edit log, that kind of puts everyone together in a room and say, okay, guys, we need to really work this out. The clock is ticking here. And there's not an awful lot of time to kind of experiment and go back on ideas. Like, you have to really commit, and then you work on that. You're a little bit in pressure cooker, but that's when very special things can happen as well. You know, like sometimes it's good to have not a lot of time, because then you're like, okay, this is a cool idea. Let's go with it. Let's risk it. Off we go. You know, like I think that I've seen a lot of really cool ads being delivered under a lot of time pressure, and still it can be a very enjoyable process, you know.
I think that goes back to what I was saying before about getting that core group of artists or different skill sets together. Because if the project goes too long, people get booked on other jobs, people are in different countries. Getting that intensity for the right amount of time is really crucial. Getting people to focus and make decisions. It's like anything in this world, right? If you get told you get two months to pick wallpaper, you're going to look at 20 different versions, and you probably won't get a decision, and your house will still end up with no wallpaper on the house, you know, on your wall. So it's just like, there is a lot to be said for having a bit of pressure, you know, a little bit of pressure, reasonable pressure, but still having enough time to actually craft and get out a few variations, because you do want to give your clients options. The best commercials I've ever made is by having iterations. You do want to craft something. You do want to actually, you know, I've worked on shots where I've done 55 versions, and I've worked on stuff that only needed 10 versions, but you do want to have time to experiment. You do want to craft. You do want to try to give your clients the right interaction. And again, it's that collaboration between the agency creatives, the filmmakers, the DP and the director coming together to really experiment and come up with something quite special.
And we've mentioned in the space of this conversation some incredible directors who really know how to obviously they know how to work with VFX specialists. They know how to get the best out of it. But what's the difference between those directors and the directors that don't really understand how to use it effectively? I think this could be quite a useful pointer for any hopeful directors out there. What should they make sure they don't do?
I think, like, especially more up and coming young directors are obviously much more familiar with that medium anyway. And I think going a little bit more back in time, like with, let's say, 20 years back, of course, that comes with trust and experience. Like once you have done a couple of those, then okay, the mill got that. Or I mean, there's a lot of great companies out there, and I think over the years you will get that trust anyway. Like, hey, I can rely on those guys to create a completely photorealistic orangutan, for instance. Like if you haven't done a lot of spots like that before, you would probably get extremely nervous. You probably don't even have that trust that it can look that realistic. And I remember probably 20 years ago, there would have been a lot of questions coming our way. Can you really deliver that orangutan, or can you do that ostrich? Can you make that ostrich fly? Nowadays, I think also with all these years that come by, you also created this kind of catalog that kind of proves it anyway, So nowadays you can say, okay, the mill has this massive catalog of character work now out there where the trust is there,
Yeah, I think it's really important, because I think what happens is when young directors come up, they're very good at hustling. They're very good at getting stuff in camera. The amount of setups they can do in one day is unbelievable. And, they come at it with a very guerrilla style artistic sense of just like, the camera feels very fluid. They don't have long, heavy setups. And then they start breaking in the industry where things become bigger, more people, more time. And it's tempting to sort of let the visual effects companies throw the kitchen sink at it. But I think that you should always, I think the directors, some of the directors that we mentioned and some of the newer directors coming up, they really pepper in just amount. They really still push to get as much in camera as possible. And, we obviously support that. We don't want to waste time or resources. We want to put our attention on the things that are really going to be important. And I think when you keep the viewer guessing and using multiple combined techniques, I think that's the best way to craft anything. Obviously a hot word is deep fake right now. And just apply deep fake. Sort of anybody and everybody's doing it, from students to sort of big VFX houses. But what's really good is when you're combining it. Any of the techniques that we do is never just a push of a button. It's always a combination of tried and tested techniques with modern sort of techniques like deep fake or virtual production. And I think the directors that are coming up, they're embracing that. And even though they could be pushed to do a shot or do a part of a shot all in visual effects, they still hold on to getting as much in camera and just sweeten that, because that's what keeps the viewer guessing and what ultimately creates something that's more photoreal and believable.
It's so interesting that you mentioned, deep fake. I mean, the mill has such a reputation for pioneering technology. Obviously, won that first Oscar for Gladiator, which was all about the crowds. And now, today, deep fake is that technology that people are so intrigued by. So what's your experience been with deep fake so far?
I think if I had $1 for every time someone mentioned deep fake or virtual production last year, I think I'd be on a yacht somewhere. Basically, again, it goes back to using the right tool for the right job. We've seen trends, CG crowds, motion control. We've seen all these trends, and then all the way through today, deep fake and virtual production and CG humans, CG animals. Again, it's really using that wisely and look, any idea when it comes to us, we're open to discuss and guide, but that's where our expertise and the relationships, people will come to us and we'll advise them. We'll be honest and say, look, I really don't think you need to use this for this type of script. I think there's other ways. I think it's not a good use of time and money. We have other suggestions, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about it and work out the best way to get you what you're trying to, without sacrificing any of your creative.
And well, now I hesitate to bring up the word virtual production, but I mean, that's quite an interesting one, and particularly the stuff that's shot on these massive volumes, because it really puts the visual effects up front. You know, I think with some clients, I know in the past it's all been about let's fix it in post or let's make that decision down the line. Now VFX is, you know, going to be in these sorts of jobs right up at the start of the process. So does it feel like that's going to substantially change the role that VFX and talents like yours play?
I think what is important for that one is, and I think it's a really good thing what happens there on the virtual production front, is where the pre-production becomes almost the production. You know, like let's say if you want to go in a studio and you want to have fantastical backgrounds, amazing backdrops, I don't know, futuristic cities, for instance, you have to obviously create all of that upfront. Back in the day, you would shoot that in a studio, green screen, you have your actor in front, then you create the cities in the background, like let's say Batman versus Superman, for instance, classic. So you would shoot everything on green. While let's say nowadays, if you want to shoot that in a virtual production environment, all of that stuff has to be, all these decisions have to be made up front. That obviously comes with almost educating everyone in that equation to align, you know. So whereby you need to say, okay, I need 2, 3, or 4 months almost upfront to do this, and then it's just 2 or 3 days shoot, and not the other way around. And I think that kind of takes a little bit of time to get everyone to agree on that one, you know. Like it's almost like you're not going to see something for quite some time. Depends purely, obviously, what you want to do, but I think it's a good thing. Like pre-production sometimes comes a little bit short anyway, looking in the past. And I think if we want to push more and more in that direction, then I think having a bit more time up front to actually discuss things like that is a good thing, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the misconception with virtual production is that you put all the time up in pre-production and you walk away with finished film. You know, I've had conversations before about schedules, and you know, so the misconception is you spend most of your pre-production that would normally be in post-production, you put that effort up front and you walk away with a 90% finished film and with only 10% of finishing left to do. I still feel like the projects I've worked on, at least, you still have a good 40–50% worth of work to be done at the end, because I started to think as virtual production as less about an environment, but more about as a lighting tool, as something to use as a reflection, as a way to get interesting lighting in a stylized way. Because a lot of the backgrounds had to be enhanced or replaced, but the actual product you were filming, say a car, for example, looked beautiful. And to create a fully CG car with that reflection would take a very long time. So I just started to think of it less about, you know, a photoreal background that I'm going to walk away and just call it a finished spot, and more of a lighting tool. And again, not to sound like a broken record, but is it the right tool for the job? And a lot of our clients came to us talking about that. And sometimes it was the right tool. A lot of the time it was like, well, that's a lot of money. Just, you know, we may be better off going with a traditional way of shooting that particular product. But again, it's all worth having a discussion about. You know, that's the great thing. If it's early enough and it's upstream, where the ideas are being discussed and there's not a creative being sold into the client yet, that's when it's great to come to the mill and talk to people and have those conversations before anything's been sold in.
It's incredible just how many options, you know, or potential directions there are that one script could take now. It's quite exciting.
I think what's great, and I think Carsten will agree, what people always outside of the industry say, why don't you work on film? And I've always loved working in advertising because of the variety. You know, like if you look back through our careers, you know, 1 minute you've got your talking animals, next minute it's you know, car commercial or submarine. The variety that we work on is unbelievable, and some of the conversations we end up finding ourselves in are just absolute, you know, bonkers, to be honest. But that's the fun of it. And where I'm going with this is that every spot that we ever work on, where we have to research ice or lemons or talking animals, you learn something, either a technique or a new piece of technology. And over the years, you collect these experiences, and it's almost like you create this sort of Bible of experience that when this perfect job comes along that really is special, really special script, you have all these skills and creative problem solves to offer up to your client based on all of those little jobs that at the time didn't seem that important. but they all came together to help you offer a service to our client to give them the best spot possible.
No, I couldn't agree more. Like, it's like a constant learning. It's almost like never leaving school, but it's the fun part of school.
Yeah.
What's the nerdiest thing that you've had to research for an ad? You know, something that you're like, I can't believe that I'm looking up this or trying to get the details on this very thing.
I remember we had to do a character once. We had to do a character once for, it was a feline character, like, and we basically then had to consult some doctors who are basically specialized in almost like dissecting them, because the detail went so crazy. We had to study the fur, and in order to get that, you obviously have to talk to some specialists who really know about the length, the thickness of the fur. So basically talking to animal specialists in that field was, at one point we were all looking at each other like, this is going so crazy into detail, but sometimes you need that in order to actually completely break the eye for the viewer to say this is photorealistic. You know, like sometimes you see yourself in a dissecting room taking all these pictures, you know, like of obviously these animals were already a long time gone, but this is really it's an important step. But obviously at that point we were all like, this is super nerdy now.
I feel like VFX artists would be amazing in a pub quiz. You must have such a good general knowledge.
100%.
Yeah, maybe not me, but I have a brain like a sieve. I always, when I move on to the next, when it comes to like some of the research I've done, not talking about the techniques and the learn problem solving, I'm talking about some of the crazy stuff you have to look up and figure out. But yeah, maybe a British pub quiz. I'm not so good with the American.
And you know, just to wrap up, I'm going to end on what's possibly a bit of an embarrassing note for you both. Viewers won't know that both Gavin and Karsten didn't really want to big up their own work during this conversation, but Gavin and Karsten have only really started working together under the same umbrella quite recently. Karsten, you were at sister company MPC. So I would love to know, what are the really iconic brand stories of each other's work that you really admire?
I would say that you know, obviously it's been really nice actually. It's getting to know Karsten. Actually, you realise you're cut from the same cloth. You had a very similar experience. You know a lot of the same people. When I realised Karsten had actually worked on the famous Ridley Scott one, I was like, damn, I wish I'd been part of that, because that was, I remember seeing that script come up. I remember hearing about it. I remember hearing Ridley Scott's name attached to it. We try to find it and see sort of sneak peaks of what were actually happening in that spot, because we knew it was going to be epic. And then I saw it, I was like, yeah. And obviously it won tons of awards and did very, very well. And some amazing epic visuals, especially one of the ones was with the giants, with the people walking in the desert in the shadow of these walking giants, was just like mind blowing. They're really strong visuals. And I was like, damn, I wish I worked on that.
Yeah, the same for me, Laura. I think looking back, like when I worked back in Germany, I think the mill back then, that was the #1 worldwide in terms of advertising. Obviously, more companies came about over the years, but I think the mill already back then, like 25 years, was already the leader. And then we're looking back in Germany, clients came to us and said, we want to have it look like this. And we're like, yep, that's the mill. And it's like a massive company. I remember watching that spot. What was it, like the PlayStation, like that Sony pyramid, you know, like that for me was kind of an absolutely iconic thing. And then obviously like the one that we touched on, the SSE Maya, everyone back then at MPC was like, wow, that we kind of have to buckle up now in order to kind of get anywhere close to that. You know, like there was so many jobs over the years where we looked at and we're like, we have to warm up a little bit here for this one. So yeah, it's been an incredible journey for sure.
Yeah. Healthy competition is very good. And even within our own office, you know, New York is always competing with LA, and it's a healthy competition. It keeps us on our A game. It's important. You know, you don't want to become complacent and just, you know, the mill has done very well. The MPC brand has done very well. you're only as good as your last 6 months. You know, you can't ever relax. You've got to keep pushing the boundaries and make sure you stay on your A game, because that's what our clients expect, you know, and that's what's exciting. You know, you just got to keep pushing to craft something that's really amazing, and you know, don't take your eye off the ball.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you both so much. I think that was an amazing conversation. I think it possibly busted a few misconceptions as well. I think if you haven't spent much time speaking to visual effects artists, it's easy to think that it's a, you know, highly technical, you know, potentially quite cold kind of discipline. But that obviously couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, yes, the technology and all that stuff's important, but you know, if you don't have the idea and you don't have that humanity and heart, then you know, what do you have?
Well said.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much for having us.